ladies and gentlemen, is Crash Twinsanity in a nutshell. Yo. After Crash the Wrath of Cortex ultimately did end up selling well, despite fan and critical reactions to the game, the Crash Bandicoot series was set for a fruitful few years. That being the years of 2002 to 2004. Altogether, 5 Crash games would release during this time period. The first of these 5 being Crash Bandicoot: The Huge Adventure, or Crash Bandicoot XS in the PAL regions, it being the series' first handheld title on the Game Boy Advance. This would be followed up by another Crash Bandicoot handheld title on the GBA entitled Crash Bandicoot 2: Entranced. Next would come a sequel of sorts to Crash Team Racing, entitled Crash Nitro Kart, which I suppose, even though it's not the next mainline game in the series, would serve as the next big game on consoles, with it launching once again on all available platforms at the time, including the GBA, might I add. Then we would get yet another Game Boy Advance title in the form of Crash Bandicoot Purple: Ripto's Rampage, which is a crossover game with the Spyro the Dragon series that, well, we'll get to that later. Once again, we'll be saving these spin-off games and handheld titles for future parts or chapters in this retrospective, because the main attraction and the end of this era would come in the form of the next mainline entry of the series, one that would come to be one of the most divisive and yet influential games in the franchise, as well as a fan favorite. The one and only Crash Twinsanity.
Once they were mortal enemies. Now they're teaming up. And they're still mortal enemies. Crash Twinsanity!
Rated E for everyone.
After Crash the Wrath of Cortex had successfully sold a fair bit, with the PS2 version of the game selling over 1.56 million units in North America, around 170,000 copies in 2001 in Japan, and the game going double platinum and getting the sales awards from the Entertainment and Leisure Software Publishers Association, or ELSPA, that meaning it had sales of at least over 600,000 copies in the United Kingdom, it's fair to say that despite the overall meh reactions to the game, people loved Crash Bandicoot, and clearly wanted more of him. Hell, this isn't even accounting for the GameCube and Xbox sales, where it also sold very well. It's no wonder then why Universal Interactive, or Vivendi Universal Games as they were known by this point in time, would have Traveler's Tales once again work on the next mainline Crash Bandicoot game. Though it should be noted that the development team did change somewhat from last time. See, Crash Twinsanity was developed by Traveler's Tales Oxford Division, a division created in 2002, solely for the purpose of reviving the Crash Bandicoot series. Originally, it was planned that they would also develop Crash Nitro Kart, that being the next big multi-platform title, but this was ultimately handed over to Vicarious Visions, while the Oxford division worked on the series' next mainline title. This new Traveler's Tales Oxford division's goal was simple but uncertain. Create something bold and fresh for the Crash Bandicoot franchise, pushing it forwards and taking the risks that Crash the Wrath of Cortex didn't dare to try. There was a lot of pressure put on this new development team, especially because all the most experienced devs at Traveler's Tales stayed at the main studio, since they had a ton of games that they were developing at this point in time. Thus, the Oxford division was the new blood, full of lots of ideas, but not so much experience to fully realize these ideas yet. But this isn't an inherently bad thing. After all, Crash Bandicoot as a franchise was started by the new blood, willing to take bold risks and be among the first to make a platformer in a 3D space. While it's easy to forget today, with Naughty Dog being a household name, back then Naughty Dog was a small team of visionaries, technical geeks and wizards, and very much new to the space of video games generally speaking, even if they had made a few very small projects before this. Still, even with that in mind, Oxford Division had a very tall order. They needed to make something fresh, but also live up to the original trilogy of Crash Bandicoot. On top of all that, they also needed to have this brand new game done and ready by the holiday season of 2004, and thus the clock was ticking, and if these developers wanted to prove themselves, they would have to move quickly. If Crash the Wrath of Cortex was playing it safe, then it's fair to say this game was meant to be a risk-taker. The game that should all go according to plan, be the direction the series evolves into going forward. Bearing all this in mind, perhaps it is rather befitting, then, that before Crash Twinsanity was, well, Twinsanity, the game was originally titled Crash Evolution. Development began shortly after the Wrath of Cortex's release, and originally the game was going to be a fair bit darker than the other games up to this point, with a ton of new gameplay elements and concepts thrown in. The game was initially proposed as a combination of an epic story with a sci-fi setting and some RPG elements. And you can probably already see a lot of the concept art here depicted shows a far different version of Crash Bandicoot. No doubt this direction was influenced by some of the more mature 3D platformer series that were out during this time, such as Ratchet & Clank, Sly Cooper, and Jak and Daxter. This was probably also influenced by the fact that the Crash Bandicoot series and its fans had grown quite a bit older by this point, so a more mature setting was probably considered the right call. There was probably also a desire to break that stigma Wrath of Cortex created around the game just being a weaker version of the original trilogy. Thus, the best way to break this stigma would be to break it entirely by doing something very new and different from anything else Crash Bandicoot as a franchise has done before. Now, from here, I'm going to be sourcing two websites that have been run and maintained by some true blue Crash Bandicoot fans over the years. That being Crashmania and Beyond Twinsanity, because the development of this game is a rather complicated one to say the least. As you can see here, a lot of concept art was made for this Crash Evolution game, including the new villains that they would end up introducing into the game, the Evil Twins. The plot of Crash Evolution had these evil twins stealing Crash Bandicoot's island from Earth, and using it as a jigsaw piece in one giant planet made from pieces of others. From what I understand, the story would then see Crash traveling across the different planet pieces to defeat bosses, save inhabitants, I assume, and ultimately thwart the evil twins' plans. Though as far as I'm aware, there is no answer as to what the big brain plan of putting all these smaller pieces of planets together to build a new planet was for. But it sounds like a very cool concept to facilitate Crash exploring some very different and crazy biomes and places. Some other details we know is Crash would have abilities, such as being able to use what the lead designer called the Foofy, this alien blob that could shoot from Crash's arm to allow him to swing around the level. This creature also acted as a space-age key, a shield, etc. Foofy also had a personality all of his own, giving Crash a new companion on his journey. We also have artwork of a cortex toxic goo plant, the twin alien ant soldiers, as well as Wampa power plants, which I guess explains a bit more into the twins' plans, since apparently Wampa fruit acts as a great power source for their technology. Artwork of the twins' logo and technology are also shown, showcasing the team's focus to make the new villains menacing and an interesting new threat. Most of this info comes from an interview with the lead designer of Crash Twinsanity, who goes by RMA Elbon, and in the interview he notes the following about some of the concept art and ideas at play for this game at this time frame. Quote, Crash's Island was going to be more volcanic towards the final stages. I believe there was even going to be time travel with twin tech as Crash explored the island years in the past. Crash Bandicoot's best ideas came from a designer called Dax, an Australian man whom I had the pleasure of working with for a year or more. He was a driving force behind nearly all of the ideas of the game and all the ideas that I have mentioned. Crash Twinsanity / Evolution was going to be a bold, fun, epic new adventure for Crash, and it had him traveling through time and space to stop the alien menace of the twins. And only working with Cortex could Crash save the day, an element that made its way into the version that we have today." Unquote. There are some absolutely amazing concepts here as well, such as the Hanging City world, this grand metropolis in the sky that underneath its gleaming shadow was this dark and brooding place, far less luxurious than the bright city above. Crash would need to help with the wealthy inhabitants of the city above and the workers in the slums below to stop the twin invasion, according to RMA Elbon, which sounds like Crash would have to somehow convince two opposing sides to come together to defeat a far greater foe, a theme that even from these concepts seems consistent with Crash ultimately having to work with Cortex, two opposing forces coming together for the greater good. Again, sounds like not only a very cool game, but a Crash game with perhaps larger themes than had ever been attempted before. Something that absolutely sounds amazing to me. I've heard a lot of discourse about this original version of Crash Twinsanity, this Crash evolution, usually coming from the perspective of people who think that going in a darker direction for Crash was a bad idea and should have never been attempted. Oftentimes in other videos and opinion pieces I've seen on Crash Twinsanity and its history, when bringing up Crash evolution as a concept is often referred to as being cringy, edgy, or just overall conceptually a bad idea, one way or another. But I actually completely disagree with this sentiment. While we will never actually know what this game would have been like, I think the core ideas here are solid, and the darker themes really seem to come from the more serious villains of the world, as well as its lore, which I think would have been a very interesting contrast with the colorful cast of established characters of Crash Bandicoot. Not all the ideas sound the absolute best, mind you, like the Foofy thing, this yellow alien thing. It sounds okay, but honestly I'd have to kind of know what type of personality this thing was supposed to have to know whether or not it would be extremely obnoxious or something actually charming. That being said, I also really like the idea of Crash inspiring other people from other planets, notably even ones with class tensions, and Crash pulling them together to beat a more dangerous foe. Now how Crash was going to do this, especially as a mute mostly, I don't know, but I like to assume that perhaps he would have done so by accident, in a bit of a comical fashion, as well as maybe just simply saving people from both sides. The idea of all these characters and places coming together to fight under the banner, the symbol of Crash Bandicoot, the accidental hero, the accidental symbol, sounds like a very cool and funny concept. I also really don't get what people are talking about when they say that this is too edgy or dark, conceptually, because it sounds like it would have been an interesting setting for Crash to roam around in. Interesting villains to fight, interesting concepts and possible themes. How anyone can look at this stuff and say, wow, this was misguided, what a terrible idea, sort of confounds me. I mean, damn man, have you no imagination? I get it. Some people have this weird brain rot where they see a cute platformer character and think, man, I could never actually take this seriously in any other context besides comedy or your basic cartoony story. But in my opinion, some of the best of this genre have done just that. Gone above and beyond just a basic comedic or cartoony story. And I think putting an entire genre in a box because you're too afraid of being cringe for taking the game about a cartoon animal person seriously is a bad faith place to come from, artistically speaking. So I guess I'll be the cringe man so you don't have to. I think these concepts are fucking sick, and it sounds like it had the potential to be a banger of a game had it been fully realized. But it of course was not. Ultimately, after a year or so, from what I understand of hard work and putting stuff together for this Crash Bandicoot Evolution project, the whole thing was then scrapped. Now, there are a few reasons for this happening. One being that I think Vivendi Universal was starting to get cold feet with this game being too different from the original trilogy. And there might have been some developers at the time second-guessing themselves if this was a risk that they were willing to take. Then this cool little game you might have heard of called Ratchet & Clank came out, which according to Paul Gardner, who was part of the development team, completely blindsided them because, quote, Evolution began with Crash's island being stolen from the Earth by the evil twins, and used as a jigsaw piece in one giant planet from pieces of others. The tone of the game was a bit more serious. The word edgy was used to describe it. But then Ratchet & Clank was released. Insomniac had the same idea. Their planet looked identical to ours. So we decided to start over, and concentrate on making a Crash game that was as funny as possible. We didn't want to be following another game, but to make a game that stood by itself, a Crash Bandicoot game, and nothing else, unquote. Now, I can understand not wanting to be compared to the likes of Ratchet & Clank. It was quite the beloved and innovative title, and perhaps they feared not only being compared to the original Crash games, but also this brand new title and series that had already made waves in the 3D platformer space. That being said, fundamentally it sounds like their game, besides the concept of putting plants together, was going to be very different. I mean, you never go to the planet Drek is building in Ratchet & Clank, nor do you travel through time. I point this out because while this might have been the final nail in the coffin of this project, I suspect there were lots of other factors that went into this scrapping of nearly everything. Evidence of this can also be seen in an interview on Beyond Twinsanity by the game's lead artist and art director, Dan Tonkin, where he is asked his favorite moment of developing the game that ended up being Twinsanity. Quote, I think my favorite moment, or period, was when we basically threw out a lot of what we had built, which was neither working from a gameplay or technical standpoint, and re-engineered the game into a new demo level to present to a soon-to-arrive executive from Vivendi, who I understand was on a mission to cancel the project. Over about a 6-week period, we put together a demo with a more efficient approach to constructing the game and with a cleaner design. It worked out very well, and we managed to pull the game out from the fire and prevent it from being cancelled. It felt like a real achievement to keep the game alive, and to see new potential in it. I remember it also pulled the team together well and gave us more cohesion as a studio, for a while. This was kind of the beginning of the second phase of Crash Twinsanity, when the whole project took a new direction. At least, that's how I remember it, unquote. So, Crash Evolution was dead, and in its place was a completely new direction for this Crash title, that of a far more cartoony, comedy-based 3D platformer, with the only things that happened to move over from Evolution being the concept of the evil twins, though they would, like everything else, be far more silly in this new game's direction, as well as the concept of Crash and Cortex working together in the game's finale, which was now the main concept for the game, with them now having to go on a full journey together to fight the evil twins. This new direction was heavily inspired by things like the Looney Tunes, Animaniacs, etc., as well as the dynamic duo of the game having influences from the likes of Pinky and the Brain, but again I kind of repeat myself with that, as well as Ren and Stimpy being heavily pulled from. One kind of smart, quick-tempered one, with a complete bumbling idiot as the sidekick. While it's a shame all their work was thrown out on Crash Evolution, this definitely also seemed like quite the promising direction, with it being different but not so different, and seemed to be a game they might actually be able to finish, which was important because, well, now that they scrapped everything, they now only had 1 year to develop the rest of the game. Man, is this sounding strangely and ominously familiar. Originally, the title of this new Crash project was called Crash Bandicoot Unlimited, and at another point it was also called Crash Bandicoot Full Flux. But according to Paul Gardner, quote, "Eventually Vivendi gave us an ultimatum. We had 1 hour to choose a title, or the title would be Unlimited, the default. The title Twinsanity came from Space Cats. He came up with it in just 5 minutes left to spare. We couldn't decide between Twinsane and Twinsanity. It seems pretty obvious now," unquote. Now, something that was planned from the very start, like back when the game was Evolution, was the idea of the game being open world. Okay, well, not the way that you're thinking. Open as in there is no loading screens. All the levels are seamlessly put together, like that of Jak and Daxter, since it was considered a marvel, and, well, they wanted to push Crash into that direction. However, since they now had only a year to make this game, well, we'll get to that. A lot, and I do mean a lot of ideas were thrown around in the concept phase for Twinsanity. Ideas that, because they only had 1 year now, would never make it into the game. In fact, Crash Twinsanity is rather infamous for just how much cut content there is surrounding it. Hell, is part of the inspiration for why websites like Beyond Twinsanity exist in the first place, since it was very clear just as a casual player, and made even more clear with even the most cursory amount of research, that Crash Twinsanity is a game that left a lot on the cutting room floor, and we will get to all that soon enough. But first, I think we've more than talked enough about the development history of the game. Plus, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So, bearing that in mind, after a year of development and lots of trials and tribulations to come, Crash Twinsanity would end up being released on both PlayStation 2 and Xbox on September 28th of 2004. So, how was it? After all these concepts, ideas, and complete changes in goals and tones for this game, how was the end product? What was the game that we ended up with? Well, let's get into that, starting with the story.
In Crash Twinsanity, a strange twist of fate has forced Crash and the evil Dr. Cortex to team up.
And there's some sweet moves in this game like Roller Brawl.
Allow us to demonstrate.
Take control of an orange daredevil and evil genius using bone-crushing team moves. Just because they're working together doesn't mean they gotta like it.
Something went wrong.
Crash Twinsanity, rated E for everyone.
Oh, greetings everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Neo Cortex Iceberg, a deep dive into the lore of the greatest mind the world has ever known. Today, Neo Bros, we'll be covering tiers 46 and 47, and will include such riveting entries as my thoughts on economics and why you don't know anything about them, or the story of when I convinced Rillaroo to kill himself. Oh, I assure you it was not hard, he did it himself pretty much. And of course, we can't forget about the much-awaited entry about my skin and hair routine, which you can see is quite wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a packed schedule, so let's jump right... Huh? Oh, you want me to talk about Crash Twinsanity's story? There's not much to talk about. I see how it is. So you're the only one that can make self-indulgent multi-part iceberg videos. They never appreciated me around here. They never truly will. You know, I don't think you'll ever know how truly painful it is to relive all these horrible failures. It feels like you're mocking me. Well, anyway, the story of Crash Twinsanity takes place 3 years after the events of Wrath of Cortex, when I was having my ass blown out by Uka Uka. Oh, that didn't come out right at all. That was really gross. Anyway, eventually we fell into the water, I guess, and became an ice block. Of course, once I was set free from my icy prison, I had one thing in mind. Say it with me. Destroy that bandicoot. I hatched the most devious plan that involved me killing, or rather stunningly, stripping Coco of her clothes and dressing up as her to convince Crash to follow me into a trap.
That's really weird, sir.
Whoa, what? Who said that? Engine? Since when did you start narrating the stories for these games?
I've been here the whole time, sir. You just didn't notice me. I kept raising my hand for a turn to talk, and you just looked at me, insulting me right in my face.
Well, maybe you deserved it if you were going to judge me for dressing up in girls' clothing for the sake of fulfilling a plan. Besides, I looked pretty good. I always look good.
Right. I'm sorry, Master. You did look pretty hot. You were practically a trans icon.
Alright. Let's not go that far. You know, you've always got to make it weird, don't you? You little uncanny, disgusting thing. Why don't you just go sit in the corner and be quiet? And hope that little rocket in your head doesn't fucking kill you or something.
Oh, yes, sir.
Anyways, me and the boys got together and set a trap for Crash, forcing him to face us all at once. There's no way he could have won. However, for some reason when I start fighting Crash, those fuckers just stood there. They didn't even try to help. I literally yelled for Engine to bring out the giant mech, which, may I remind you, he had the whole time and could have helped me at any fucking moment. Brain dead fucking retard!
No, sir. You can't say that. You'll get canceled and deplatformed on Twitter.com.
Engine, I don't even have a fucking Twitter, and it's called X now. Just so you know. Never mind. In a fit of overwhelming, all-encompassing rage, I throw myself at Crash Bandicoot, fighting him down into a cave until I eventually find a power crystal. And you won't believe this, that's not even the craziest thing we found down there. These ant alien thingies just start attacking us. I, of course, being the brave, powerful, evil genius I am, fight them all off and save us both. You know, Crash was whimpering in the corner like the little coward he is. But I am a very kind soul when it comes to the weak and powerless, as you know. After using only 1% of my power, we make our brave escape. And wouldn't you believe it, after all I did, Crash refuses to give me the damn crystal. Well, eventually we find out that these two green birds from another dimension wants to take over the Wumpa Islands for some reason, and they really seem to not like me, which is crazy. Who doesn't like me? I'm so cool and stylish and sexy. Oh my god, I love myself. Oh, what am I saying? I'm going to drop the LARP. I'm ashamed to admit it, but they made an utter fool of me. After suffering such humiliation and getting some nasty PTSD flashbacks to Uka Uka, I decided that the best course of action would be to work alongside Crash Bandicoot to defeat these evil twin birds. Since he was so good at defeating bad guys, his natural talent could finally work in my favor. For once. And who knows, the opportunity may arise for me to get rid of him after it's all said and done. Plus, I'd be able to star in a video game for once. The main character! This is going to be fun, and I'm sure other humiliations will not come in my adventure. No further humiliations, right? Dylan the Night Owl? Oh, do you hear me? You know, your name really does sound like one of my crazy inventions. Dylan the Night Owl.
So yeah, the story of Crash Twinsanity is pretty different right off the bat from the games that we've discussed thus far, and I have a lot to say about it. However, instead of going through it all now, I'm going to approach this game a bit differently. Because Crash Twinsanity, unlike the last three games, is completely linear, and thus the story unfolds and we get far more cutscenes in this game than we've ever gotten in the past ones. And not just talking heads in a void either, but full-on cutscenes. So, as noted before by Cortex, the game opens with Cortex dressing up as Coco to trick Crash Bandicoot into following him into a trap, quickly establishing a familiar but very different tone for this game, which I'll get into more momentarily. But first, it's gameplay time, and right from the start after the first cutscene, we are thrown onto Insanity Island, Crash's home to explore around and learn the fundamentals, as well as this little cutscene of Aku Aku introducing himself to you, the player, I guess, since Crash already knows who he is, but anyway.
It is I, Aku Aku. My duty is to protect you. You may summon me by breaking open these crates. Call me thrice, and I shall grant you special powers.
Immediately what is sure to feel different from any Crash Bandicoot game made up to this point is, well, Crash having an open plane to walk around and explore in. No linear paths, just open space to try out your moveset, not unlike that of Jak and Daxter or Spyro the Dragon. This is one of those essential things Twinsanity adds to the table. And while there are plenty of more linear parts in the game still, you'll find several points throughout the story where you'll be given free reign to explore like this, collecting gems. Oh, right, remember gems? Those things that were always much more difficult to collect in the past games over crystals? Well, in this game, 6 gems are hidden in every single level, usually behind some sort of platforming puzzle, which gets gradually more difficult as you progress through the game. I'll come back more to this later, but these are the main collectibles in the game. However, they are also entirely optional, so you don't actually have to collect them all, or any of them, if you don't want to, I suppose. Another big change you're sure to notice from the offset is the soundtrack. You see, to match the more comedic and cartoony wild energy that they had going on for Twinsanity, they hired a a cappella group named Spiral Mouth to compose the entirety of this game's soundtrack. Now, if you're not familiar with a cappella music, it's basically music made entirely with voice, no instruments, and often are people imitating instruments with their mouths. It results in a unique sound, and in Spiral Mouth's case, a unique sound that is tied deeply within Crash Twinsanity's DNA. What I mean is, it's got the vibe of whimsical mischief, silly antics, and kind of sounds like a Looney Tunes cartoon, if that makes any kind of sense. It's also one of the most controversial aspects of the game, as this music is either something you really dig and love for its distinctive sound and style, or it's something that absolutely grates on your nerves and drives you crazy. I've heard people on both sides of this, and I think I fall somewhere in the middle. There are for sure some tracks that I think are really catchy bops and fit the scene super well, but in general, it all sort of fades into the background for me at some point when I'm playing. But I figured since it is such a major part of Twinsanity's atmosphere, it was an important thing to note at the beginning. Let me know in the comments down below where you fall on this, whether you love it, you hate it, or you're somewhere in the middle. Either way, I don't think I'm rustling any feathers when I say that it is very iconic. There is also two more very important changes we have still yet to talk about. The first being the character designs, or redesigns rather. While not every character had a major redesign, these characters do look stylistically different from the past iterations. The first of which being Crash himself, who, on a whole, looks pretty similar to how he looked before, but with a new pair of pants, that have these, knee pads, steel plates, something like that. His mohawk of hair is extra spiky, his model is much better quality than the one that we saw in Wrath of Cortex, more textured pants and shoes, and well, okay, this one's gonna be hard to explain, but I've always thought that this version of Crash kind of felt like Steve-O from Jackass. Does anyone else just get this vibe that this is a Steve-O-fied Crash Bandicoot? This might be my most harebrained, most crazy-ass take ever throughout this whole retrospective. And maybe, to be fair, it's the commercials for the game featuring the Jackass show star doing stunts, or the general skater / more troublemaker vibe I'm getting from this design. But I don't know, something about Crash here just kind of feels like Steve-O. Am I alone in this extremely strange thought? It's okay if I am. I just felt like someone had to finally say what might be on other people's minds. It had to be put out there into the world at least once. Anyway, Coco looks pretty similar as well, besides her ditching the overalls and her model in general just being better looking. Not that you're gonna see much of her in this game, but we'll get to that. Then we have Cortex, who has gone through a far more dramatic change. He's now sporting red gloves and boots, black eyeliner, extra spiky tufts of hair, and a far more expressive face. Actually, I should note that all the characters are far more expressive in this game compared to the Wrath of Cortex, or the original trilogy, with cutscenes being a consistent highlight as these models stretch and squash and are a genuine upgrade that is finally utilizing that next-gen technology to fully express that Looney Tunes design philosophy. I could go on, like how my boy Pinstripe actually shows up in this game, or fucking Koala Kong. Oh, and hey, there's Crunch, which, we'll come back to. The final thing of note in this opening area, and, well, something to keep in mind for the entirety of the game, are the controls. First of all, because you can now run and jump anywhere you want for the first time in this series' history, you now have camera controls. They work well, no real complaints, though strangely enough, every time you move the camera, Crash moves his head in the direction that you move the camera in, so the right analog stick moves the camera as well as Crash's head for some reason. It never really gets in the way, mind you, but I've always found it weirdly distracting, especially how his head snaps into place quickly after you're done moving the stick. It's always just seemed like a random and needlessly disorienting addition. Anyway, you can still run, jump, and spin as always, but there are seeds of, let's just say, a disagreeable creative choices right off the back. To start, your jump feels alright. It feels fairly different from the other games though, but is overall fairly controllable. However, when you go to do a slide jump, no, they couldn't have. they actually did it. They took away the slide jump, one of the most fun and unique platforming mechanics in the Crash Bandicoot series, and not only did they remove it, but they replaced it with this pathetic long jump, which locks you into place, is never going to be used in the game at any point ever, besides walking slightly faster in loading zones, I guess, and is overall extremely sluggish, and personally feels very unsatisfying to pull off. You do get a double jump though, but that's it. That is your whole moveset. Jump, spin, slide, and I guess slide, trip over yourself move, which is a problem. In fact, I think it's a rather big problem with this game. Now, why do I say that? Well, besides needlessly taking out a signature move and replacing it with something useless, this is, once again, the first Crash game where you get to explore and platform around open zones. And with that type of gameplay often comes certain expectations, like it being fun to platform around said zones, maybe a bit of variety in jumps and general moveset to make exploring all the more interesting. But Crash Twinsanity has none of that. No, actually, everything is far more simplified. Everything can be conquered with a double jump, and Crash gets no new moves throughout the whole game. Now, a game like this having simpler controls, again, so long as they feel good, is still perfectly fine, mind you. It's not a issue in of itself. But then we come to the big fat bandicoot in the room. This game is janky, to say the least, and a glitch-ridden fucking disaster, to say the most. While it would be rather difficult to showcase them all here, a common glitch in this game is for sequences to just break out of nowhere for seemingly no reason, causing you to have to die and restart a section. However, a much more consistent glitch that is always around no matter what is that there are times where in order to collect a gem, you need to platform across silver crates. And, well, wouldn't you know it, in this game, silver crates don't cast your shadow on them, meaning in times like this, you have to jump semi-blindly or by feel in order to beat the challenge, because you literally cannot see where your shadow is going to land. Why don't the silver crates cast your shadow? I don't know. Then you have these physics puzzles, such as this one where you gotta put a bomb in this tiki idol mouth. But the controls on moving this thing is unruly, and honestly, in all the years I've played this game, I can never quite get a good feel for these. Either I'm moving it too slowly, or I start moving it quickly, and now it's like going all over the place, and I'm suddenly not moving it because it like stops controlling it. It's a very annoying physics-based system. And what's more is that this little area is actually the first one of its kind in the game, and if you don't do it right the first time, well, there's no more spawning bombs here, so if you want to get that gem, you gotta die in order to get another chance to do it, which means having to listen to this cutscene of Uka Uka talking to you again.
It is I, Uka Uka. My duty is to protect you. You may summon me by breaking open these crates. Call me thrice, and I shall grant you special powers.
Then you have this puzzle where you need to herd these chickens into nitros in order to get this gem. Chickens who, by the way, go any which fucking way that they want, and seem to have no rhyme or reason as to what direction they're going to be moving in, which can easily lead to your death. Why are they this way? I don't know.
It is I, Uka Uka.
Alright, Uka Uka gives me an extra hit point. I can just charge right into the nitros and get the... wait a minute. Nitros kill you in one hit, no matter what? Yes, I suppose that's something you're bound to find out rather quickly in this game. But nitros in this game kill you in one hit, no matter what. Even if you have 3 masks that you're wearing and are literally supposed to be invincible for 20 seconds, the nitros will still kill you. Why do they do this? I don't know. Well, actually, you know what? No, I do know why. And I think they work this way because in almost every platforming puzzle in this game, to collect a gem, it usually involves silver crates, ouch, and nitro crates. So I think they made them insta-kill no matter what, so that you can't just cheese all of these platforming puzzles. Now, I say I think they made them this way, because to be perfectly honest, I don't actually know if that was an intentional design choice or a complete accident and design oversight, since the game is full of design oversights. Like the fact that after every single time you die, you gotta see this same cutscene from Uka Uka play out. And the same goes for every other cutscene in the game besides the pre-rendered ones, by the way. And there is no way to skip them. And trust me, this feature is gonna come back in a big way later on. But either way, Uka Uka's special powers aren't so special in this game. Then there's some weird stuff. Like early on, how if you fall from any kind of height, Crash will fall on his ass and play a slow animation to get back up, which is just needlessly fucking annoying. It's also possible to kill yourself doing this, by the way, which again, why? Or how about this puzzle where you gotta get all these bombs into the tiki heads, and at some point you gotta shoot one into this tiki head, which you would think you just gotta like do a big body slam to shoot past it? And no, that doesn't work. So maybe you gotta take the long route around, but there is none. No, for some reason, this very early puzzle is solved by you sliding into the bomb, which for some reason will make it jump into the air over the log, allowing you to blow up the last tiki head. The game, as far as I'm aware, never tells you about this mechanic anywhere, by the way, and it almost never comes back as a mechanic again until like the very end of the game, which again is for more optional content in getting the gems. Why does the slide do this to objects? I don't know. Why does the slide make other things jump but not Crash himself? I don't know. Well, actually, I lied. I do know the answer to quite a few of these questions, but I think that's best covered in full a little bit later. So, thus far we have explored about 1% of this game, and already there is a lot of issues I have with it. Weird creative decisions, possible developmental oversights, and one at a time, these things are kind of small to medium-sized issues. But when they're all combined, it starts to really add up. And hell, while we're here at level 1, I might as well also point out that if you were one of those people who wanted to collect all the gems in each area, you'll probably be pretty confused, since the first area in the game, there are only a couple of gems that you can get, and there's a few that you simply cannot get right now until like an hour or so later in the game. You have to leave the first area having not completed it, which sets a weird precedent that is never repeated again in the game. Add that with level 2 Jungle Bungle's weird never explained slide jump thing that you might never figure out if you don't think to do that or just look it up, I guess. And the whole beginning of the game, this open area, it all feels very half-baked, messily designed, a far cry from the banger 3D platformers that were coming out at the time. And in a weird way, because it's so difficult or seems impossible at first to complete these first few levels, you might actually be disencouraging your player base to go after all the gems, since from the beginning they weren't able to get all the gems in the first level, and then in the next one there's a thing that's nearly impossible to figure out without fucking around for a while. First impressions are important, and the cutscenes are stellar. Animation is stellar. All that sort of stuff, the presentation is great. The gameplay though, it's kinda shit, gonna be real. Don't like the way this whole first area is designed. I like what they were trying to do, but the execution, not so much. But we can't stay here forever. and I think I've listed a lot of the issues that are going to be consistently coming up later throughout the rest of the game. So, let's actually get to the rest of the game, shall we? After you're done exploring the beach and actually follow Cortex into the jungle, you will go through an extended tutorial of sorts for all your basics like jumping, spinning, etc. In case you hadn't thought to try any of that stuff out or just skip the beach area by now. It's here where the tone of the game and story are further cemented, with Cortex showing you, or rather Crash, how to use all of this stuff.
Alley-oop! It's true. Blondes do have more fun. I'm okay. The spikes broke my fall.
The game also acknowledges that it is in fact a game, with this meta joke from the skunk who has had enough of his simple AI of the past.
Hey! Yeah, you! I've been doing this for 10 stinking years. Back and forward, and I'm sick of it! Well, I'm not gonna do it no more!
It's all very tongue-in-cheek, and I like it a fair bit. It's fun to see Cortex in this weird and desperate position of this being his plan to get Crash to follow him. It's also very reminiscent of Looney Tunes gags where Bugs Bunny would dress up like a girl. This section is also one of the many more traditional type levels in the game, with it mostly being a linear path, but with the occasional detour for collecting gems, which becomes the standard going forward from here outside of main hub levels. It's a pretty decent structure. Then, after this, we get our first boss battle after this little cutscene where Cortex unveils his plan, and all his minions he's invited, including Crunch Bandicoot, who is the only one who came to legitimately celebrate Crash's birthday party. Actually, not to get too off on topic, but did you know that originally this cameo from Crunch was never going to make it into the game? This information was first learned via an interview with Paul Gardner, who online often goes by Fake Ninja. He was asked if Crunch was ever meant to have a more important role in the story, since this is the only time that we ever get to see him in this game, and Crunch was kind of becoming a more established character in the trio at this point, so it was kind of weird that he completely was missing outside of this one cameo in the story. To which he replied, quote, "No, as far as I remember, we never planned for Crunch to be playable. We put him in the party scene specifically because the Crash fans liked them so much, and one Crash fan in particular, Tanny Tiger, I think, we used to spend a lot of time reading Crash fan sites and message boards. That was what made me realize how important Crash was for a lot of people, and made us want to make as good a Crash game as we could," unquote. Now, I find this answer really endearing, because remember, Crash Twinsanity came out in 2004, and while it's sometimes more common for game devs to communicate with their audiences these days, usually to apologize for releasing a half-finished game, but nonetheless, this kind of interaction back then was quite something. To me, it says that the devs of this game were very hardcore Crash fans, enough so that they went to the Crash forums and listened to what people wanted, and tried to include stuff in the game that would make them happy. Even if they often fall short within the game itself, the effort and love here is truly commendable. I mean, imagine if Sega had included Sally Acorn and Sonic Heroes because they went to forums and saw Richard Kuda, amongst other Archie and Sonic SatAM fans, talking about how much they want her in the game. Even if it's just a little cameo, that is fucking crazy to think about. At any rate, the first boss is actually really good. You get this decent little first round against Cortex, before you then fight the Mecha Bandicoot, piloted by Engine. A Cortex fight and an Engine fight right from the start. It's all easy of course, but a great way to open the game in a gripping fashion, with all expectations being thoroughly subverted, leaving what comes next as Cortex and Crash start fighting each other in a big cartoon dust cloud completely up the mystery. I also like this little interaction between Dingodile and Ripperoo.
Lunch?
I think this was the exact point in my first playthrough as a kid that I knew story-wise I was gonna love this game, because I always ate up seeing these established characters, particularly villains, kind of act a bit more normal, or hint at lives off screen, and there is a fair bit of that in this game's writing and handling of the characters, which I'll get more into as we go along. But I will say right now that it's handled extremely well. Anyway, from here we get level 3, Cavern Catastrophe, where we get this section where we control a ball of crashing cortex fighting down into the mines, which kinda reminds me of the Atmosphere levels from Wrath of Cortex. It's fine enough and eventually culminates in Cortex finding a crystal, randomly. And then this drill pops up from the ground and out comes these alien looking guys with lightsabers that you gotta fight and destroy these buttons on their ship to get rid of. And this is where I suppose I should note something odd about this game. This happens like 1 or 2 times throughout the story, but these sections where Crash has to fight off these 2-hit to kill enemies really showcases how weak Crash's moveset is here, as hitting these things, especially in groups, has always felt a bit awkward to me, and what should be a fun little action scene becomes you hoping these dumb bugs get out of your way so you can body slam the buttons so they just go the fuck away, because Crash is not well equipped to fight hordes of enemies in this game. Add that with the weird hitboxes and general jank, and sometimes these sections can be kind of annoying, or at least just not fun as they could be. Also, there's a bunch of Aku Aku masks in this area to kind of help you beat said area, but oddly enough, none of them actually work, or at least they didn't on this recent playthrough. I tried hitting them and nothing happened. So, you know, that's nice. After that absolute mess, you then spin into Cortex and, well, if it wasn't made clear by the front of the cover, Cortex will be here along for the ride for the rest of this adventure. Story-wise, I absolutely love this idea, and as we progress through the narrative, I have almost nothing but good things to say about Cortex, and how Crash and Cortex's relationship is kind of recontextualized in this game. But gameplay-wise, this usually means you'll play as Crash, often using Cortex as a tool or weapon for getting past areas or flipping switches, such as this section after the alien attack where Crash and Cortex both hold onto the crystal as a sort of link. While like this, you cannot jump very high, but you can use Cortex as a sort of frontward body slam. You can also throw him to places that you can't reach. It's pretty basic, but a decent enough gimmick. But if I'm being honest, any section like this in the game is mostly just kind of slower Crash Bandicoots, since you'll be platforming and running about as usual. But now with the addition of Cortex, you gotta throw ahead of you and wait for his AI to figure out what to do. However, on the back of the box, and in much of the advertising of this game, it showed that you were going to be able to play as Cortex, who we'll get into more later, but by contrast isn't much of a jumpy man, but instead packs some heat via his laser pistol, and generally works better in packs of enemies. The only issue is, you won't be able to actually play as him until well over halfway through the game, which is weird since he's there from the start. I'm surprised they didn't have Cortex fight off this bunch of aliens in the first scene so that it can establish that you can play as them early on, and just generally gives you a feel for the character early on. It also would have been cool to actually been able to switch between the two characters more often, or even just straight up on the fly in order to be able to solve puzzles or something. But I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, after that, the cave starts collapsing and Crash and Cortex have to escape, so you spin these platforms and finally make it out and yeah. You know, it's funny enough that Crash is running in place, and this seems to be the way this cutscene always plays out. After this, we make our way outside and we are introduced to our two main villains, the evil twins, as they come out of a big zipper and, well, I'll let this first interaction play out.
Feels good. I was bursting in there.
How are you fools before the awesome might of
The evil twins.
Aren't you two adorable? Let me see. I might have some chalky treats here for you.
Chalky treats? Oh! We've some good news and some bad.
The bad news? We're going to destroy your precious islands.
The good, you won't be around to see it.
How tiresome.
Oh, you want to play mind games? Okay, tough guy. Let's play mind games. This is the part where you run away screaming. Go on, run!
Catch you later, Brainiac!
So these evil twins are here to destroy these islands and plan on killing Crash and Cortex before that happens. Why? Well, we don't really know yet, but I do find it funny that they have a bit of a pinky in the brain dynamic going on. Again, not unlike that of Crash and Cortex right now. The rest of Insanity Beach's gems, you remember the first area in the game, are here in this little section after the cutscene, by the way. Again, so bizarre. After this, we get another cutscene where Cortex, who's managed to get his brain back into his head, has a one-to-one with Crash, very clearly saying that this threat will be difficult to take on his own.
You have to help me, Crash. You heard them. They want to destroy our island home, humiliate and enslave you, and steal my brain. How I envy the simple life of the tribesfolk.
What have I got? What have I got? What have I got?
Living in harmony with Mother Nature. The noble boar, the humble bumblebee. Ah!
I really like this scene because it can kind of be read two different ways. On one hand, Cortex could be saying all this to convince Crash to help him in defeating the twins. I mean, I guess this is true either way, but since he knows that they are a very dangerous threat, he's going to need someone to help him. Which is ironic since most of the threats that he's noted are things that he himself has tried to do, and things he has tried to destroy in the past. On the other hand, I also weirdly like the idea of Cortex, in the face of a force that could easily destroy all of this, that he perhaps has grown maybe even just a little attached to the islands and come to appreciate these smaller aspects of them. Either way though, it's a funny moment followed by a long gag sequence where you gotta try and keep Cortex out of trouble by staying ahead of him, flipping switches, destroying hazards and the like, as his situation gets even more dire and over the top. Then by the end of this section, Cortex is kidnapped by Papu Papu, and Crash has to go save him from a giant totem pole. In the pursuit of this goal, you'll end up going through this stealth section of all things, where you gotta avoid these binocular guys by crouching behind stuff, and yeah, if it wasn't abundantly clear by now, this game is constantly going into new directions, presenting new scenarios and gameplay styles and ideas that have never really been tried out in Crash as a series before. They don't often land perfectly, mind you, usually because of glitches, weird AI, or the idea just not really suiting your moveset, but thus far Crash Twinsanity has certainly kept it very fresh and very different from the past entries, for better or worse. Something else you'll be sure to notice with this game is the way the story and levels progress is pretty natural for the most part. See, what they were aiming for was something like Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy, where there was no loading screens and levels flowed into one another very naturally, as if it is a real breathing open world. Now, Crash Twinsanity is nothing like Jak and Daxter, especially since Twinsanity is a mostly linear game with the occasional open area, while Jak is an open world game with the occasional bits of linearity. However, everything thus far has flowed together, going from your beach home, to a forest run, to an underground cavern, to back to the beach, and on to a native village. It's all connected in that sense, but some, let's call it interesting, workarounds had to be made in order for a game like this, that is kind of held together by scotch tape and glue-up points, to have no loading screens. And that workaround comes in the form of what I'd like to call loading tunnels. Throughout the game, you'll come across these tunnels, caves, or hallways that always come in between big new sections of the game. And sometimes they have a platforming puzzle, except they actually don't, because that would be fun and would be a nice distraction, and would probably make you think that it is not a loading tunnel and just an extension of the normal world. Instead, these areas strangely always have this exact type of platforming thing. Basically, it's a bunch of insta-kill nitros, and what looks to be a difficult or impossible to pass area, but lucky for you, there is a TNT/nitro crate destroyer to destroy them all so that you can easily jump through the section. The game does this so often and so consistently, I'm kind of surprised I don't hear more people talk about it in their reviews or analysis of the game. It would be okay as a one-off thing, but it's always the exact same thing. Just activate this switch and then all the nitros are gone and then you just walk. It's just kind of meant to waste your time while the next area loads. Which again, I understand on a technical level is needed, but I feel like they could have come up with something better than this. Because it's just blowing up nitro crates in your way. There's never a clever turn of events where you gotta pick between two different ones, or maybe you gotta hit them in a certain order, or maybe it's just a normal fucking platforming section instead of this. So while yes, the levels are interconnected, it's not in the most elegant fashion, shall we say. But I do commend the effort. It's clear even this early on that they were really trying to push the series in new ways. And there are times when the game loads are a bit more seamless, usually when it involves a cutscene though, and not a hallway. Anyway, you end up exploring through this native village, something Crash hasn't done since, well, Crash 1 actually, and you end up finding old Poo Poo just hanging out in some hut. I do like this little area, even if again, fighting these natives feels really finicky here. And so, you save Cortex, run away from the natives who are pissed that you stopped them for doing whatever they are going to do to Cortex, go through another nitro loading tunnel, and then we get a rather interesting cutscene that I'll show in full here.
Oh, Crash. The farmer's market is tomorrow, and my wampa trees won't grow, for my orchard is riddled with greedy worms. If you rid my land of these pests, I'll give you this power crystal.
I'm an evil scientist. What do you expect? This isn't a game.
I really like this moment as it's a fun showcase of Cortex's personality, as well as a great meta joke about people asking the protagonists of 3D platformers to do random bullshit for prizes. And Cortex, well, he's a man of action. A bolt-action rifle, that is. Not one to do grunt work. He's got that Sigma male grind set. He's gonna fucking kill this bitch before he does any manual labor for him. Also, random note, but this bird guy stunned/dead body can sometimes glitch and hurt you if you touch him, which I have no idea why it sometimes does this, but yeah, I figured I'd note it.
I tell you, you boys have been doing swell. Just swell. Anyhow, we've been taking in the sights of Insanity Island here. Nice digs. So much to see, so much to destroy. You got the native village, the lava caves, the totem gods. Yeah, back in the 10th dimension, we don't have anything near as nice as the totem gods. The vivid colors, the intricate carving, you know, it's almost as if they're alive. Yeah. Almost. Exactly as if they're alive.
Anyway, we then go on to Boss Battle 2, which conceptually is pretty cool. Basically, the evil twins bring this giant totem idol to life, and the boss isn't terrible, but there is one slight, tiny, but still significant problem with it. Under normal circumstances, I'd say it's a pretty easy boss. However, it sadly can be cheesed to make it even easier. You might be noticing by my gameplay footage, but if you haven't been able to find out what the trick is yet, well, I'll give you the tip of the lifetime. It's running in a circle. All you gotta do in this boss fight is run in a circle, and no matter what attack he has, none of them will ever be able to hit you or catch up to you. Though it does have a kind of unique gameplay element where if you leave Cortex behind, the little guards that the totem pole conjures up will kill him, forcing you to have to start over. Oh, and after you do beat the boss, if you happen to touch his dead body, you will then die and have to fight the boss all over again as well. Why does this happen? I don't know. So overall, not the best boss. The first one was a lot better. However, next we have yet another important cutscene from the twins.
Oh, nuts.
There's nuts?
Well, you gave it your best shot. But even now, our vice versa reverser device is in operation, sucking the goodness out of this dimension and leaving behind the worst of all possible worlds. We just like making a mess.
See you all, losers! Say, is it lunchtime yet?
10th dimension. Yes, yes! In the dark ocean of my intellect swims a magnificent whale of a plan. To the laboratory! We're not beaten yet. The game is on!
Now I say this is an important cutscene because Victor, the brain bird is named Victor, and the pinky brain is named Moritz, by the way, a reference to Victor Moritz, a character from the 1931 classic horror film Frankenstein, which is quite cool. But at any rate, Victor says that they have what they call a vice versa reverser device, sucking all the good out of this dimension and leaving only the bad here, which is interesting, and I suppose is what Victor meant about destroying the islands and them not being around to see it, since all the good stuff will be taken out of the dimension and all the bad stuff will be left behind. What exactly that means, I don't really know. But it's an interesting concept. Like, Crash is good, right? So would he be sucked into their dimension? Or because he's good and they're bad, would he stay here and Cortex go? But then he's bad at, well, everything. So maybe they just mean, like, it's good for them, but not objectively. I don't fucking know what the vice versa reversa device thing is supposed to fucking do. Is it maybe supposed to replace the twins world with our world? Hence the name? I guess it also sounds like the remnants of the plot from Crash Evolution, with the twins stealing parts of planets. Is that what it's supposed to be? Well, we'll leave that aside for now. I'm sure the game will explain at least some of these questions that I have later on. Right?
छुट्टियों के दिन है मस्तियों के दिन है मैकडॉनल्ड्स चलकर मॉल जुड़ाए चलकर हैप्पी मील खाए मजे मजे के क्रैश बैंडिकूट साथ लाए दोस्तों को साथ खिलाए कूदे और गाए अरे छुट्टियों के दिन है
Before you rises a cathedral of diabolical genius. Scary, but in the wrong hands, this iceberg lair could do much goodness in the world. Of course, only I have the key. Observe. Follow me. I know another way.
Alright, so after we make our way onto a boat and sail off to the iceberg island that Cortex's current base is located in, this officially marks the second act of the game, as well as the second hub of levels in the game. It's here where the game really starts coming together a bit more. I've been pretty negative up until this point, but I really do like the design of this area, and the idea of Cortex building a whole-ass iceberg lab while he was, I guess, there, waiting for revenge. Some great parts of the game story-wise also happen here, such as this rather iconic moment when Cortex confronts a bunch of penguins and mentions,
The check bounced. Are you sure? Well, the past few years have kind of been slow. Wrath of Cortex didn't do as well as we'd hoped, and... Fish?
You can really tell the developers were quite aware of where Crash was as a franchise, and again, where the fandom was as well. Now, I haven't mentioned it up until this point, but Cortex, for the first time here, is played by voice actor Lex Lang. And while Clancy Brown's performance as Cortex is quite iconic, and I do really love it, I must also admit that, to me, Lex Lang is my preferred version of Cortex voice-wise. There is still that evil mad scientist energy, and it sounds at times similar to Clancy Brown. However, what Lex Lang brings to the table is a really lovable amount of arrogance and devilish cruelty to the character. He loves doing what he does, and very much loves himself, which is also makes it all the more funny when Cortex is put into embarrassing and crazy situations all throughout the game, and we get to hear that pathetic tone in his voice. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but Cortex in this game is a much more fully realized character. It takes what was already good about him, especially from Crash Warped, a man at the end of his rope, and extends it to the fullest degree. Cortex, while arrogant, manipulative, and evil, is also very insecure, impatient, and ultimately a coward at the end of the day. He's a bad guy even if he's working alongside you, but a lovable bad guy all the same. He's also in such a state of constant suffering throughout the game that I can't help but root for him at the end of the day. Hashtag Cortex did nothing wrong. Add that with the far more expressive character model, as well as, again, Lex Lang's really good performance, and you have one of, if not my personal favorite iteration of Dr. Cortex. This is truly one of the greatest components of this game by far, and is only going to get better as the game goes on. At the same time, though I suppose I should mention that while I do love this level design-wise, there is still a lot of glitches present throughout. Like in this cutscene where Cortex can't open his front door. He instructs Crash to go another way, and, well... yeah. You know, I feel like that moment is the perfect microcosm of this game in a nutshell. A pretty funny joke, followed up by a blatantly obvious glitch that was accidentally funny, but also objectively flawed. It's not game-breaking, mind you, but they are still all the same evidence of this game being extremely rough around the edges. Very intentionally funny, very accidentally funny, still, overall, quite flawed. Anyway, the first major level here I do enjoy quite a bit, due to it being a lot more traditional as far as platforming and the like, though it does seriously feel like there should be a change of song at some point during this section. Eventually though, you happen upon who else but Uka Uka, frozen in ice.
Free again!
Mighty Uka Uka!
Who has released me from my icy tomb? My, can it be? Crash and Cortex? I don't know whether to kiss you or kill you!
And so now, for the first time in the series' history, we are fighting Uka Uka as a boss, the big bad of the series. And it's pretty easy and kind of completely unnoteworthy. Wow, that's kind of anticlimactic. Perhaps it was part of the point, but I always assumed that if Crash ever fought Uka Uka one-on-one, it would pretty much be the ultimate evil type of boss fight. A culmination of multiple rounds and Yeah, just like a really good boss. But, nope. I mean, I suppose he was put on the spot a bit. He just put together some ice blocks as a body. I guess this isn't really him at his full power. But then again, we never really get to fight Uka Uka at his full power throughout the series after this. Oh, well, I take that back. Actually, we do fight Uka Uka one more time in this series, but, we'll get to that. Anyway, so then as Uka Uka is making his way out, Aku Aku informs them that there is an evil greater than even him that is threatening to destroy this world. And that obviously greatly bothers Uka Uka, since that's his job. So they decide for the time being to work together to fight the evil twins. However, in the time it takes for us to go through another loading nitro zone and into the main control room of Cortex's base, we get a cutscene showcasing that masked Jesus and Satan were, not up to the task.
It's probably for you.
Trick or treat, trick or treat.
Fools! You thought these two party toys could defeat us? We are masters of the infinite dimensions, with power over reality itself.
And riches beyond imagination.
Riches?
Riches? What's wrong with you? Always bringing up the riches. You don't remember us, do you, Doctor?
Should I?
You ruined our lives. Allow us to return the favor.
Insert section where you fight off a bunch of alien guys because these masters of reality itself would rather send a bunch of dumbass grunts than literally just melt our minds right here and now, I suppose.
You see? This is why nobody likes you. A curse on you, Crash Bandicoot. A curse on you all. We shall return.
Oh, forget I mentioned the riches thing, huh?
Dr. Cortex, what have you done?
Who are these evil upstarts? I've ruined the lives of so many. I can't be expected to remember them all.
God, that line is fucking gold. And so, Aku Aku and Uka Uka are willing to hand Cortex over to the twins in order to save their world. But Cortex convinces Crash to help him fight against them instead. Not sure why this would change Uka Uka's mind, but yeah, it's a funny scenario if nothing else, and I overall really love this scene. But I do have to point something out. This is now the third time that the twins have shown up, and the third time that they have come to our protagonist with a completely different motivation. First they want to destroy these islands, but we don't know why for sure. Then they want to suck all the goodness out of this dimension and leave only the bad. Don't know why exactly or what that even means, but okay, sure. And now the twins seem to mainly want revenge on Dr. Cortex, and while we don't know why, this will be the plot point that ends up being followed up on. The whole vice versa reverser machine, remember that? Remember how there was a whole cutscene where they made that a point? That was going to be like an important plot element? Well, that is never brought up as a plot element or even a thing ever again. In fact, that cutscene is the only time it's ever brought up at all. Despite it sounding like that was a super important element to their plan, it's just not, I guess. Now, I will say, I actually really like the motivation that they do end up having in wanting to get revenge on Cortex, and I'll get more into that later on as the details as to why they want revenge on him are revealed. But I point this out because it's easy to kind of forget the twins said any of this other stuff, and it sort of feels like the developers didn't even fully know what they wanted the twins to do, or what their motivation was until further on into development. Basically, they were just winging it. Yeah, you get it, because never mind. Anyway, maybe I'm wrong, and this is just evidence of plot points that never came to be, because, you know, the game's not finished. But I figure I'd note it all the same, because again, it's clear that something is missing.
This is the Psychotron, gateway to the infinite dimensions. Beyond our universe, somewhere between the 9th and 11th dimensions, lies the mysterious 10th dimension. And there we must go in order to confront the evil twins, steal the riches, and restore the natural order of things, with me on top. We require 6 power crystals in order to make the leap, and we have 4. Let's see. That isn't enough! All is lost, unless...
So, with our goal firmly in place, we go through another nitro loading tunnel, of course, and then we get what I'd say is the most iconic cutscene in this whole game, for what is no doubt the most iconic level in the game. It was all over advertisements, and well, I'll just let this cutscene play out.
There! To the sea, I tell you! Our salvation floats upon the briny blue! We must reach Engine's battleship, and quickly before it sets sail! But how? Think, Cortex, think!
Crash, you dirty, dirty bastard! This is one of the best gags in the game, with not only a joke that's, well, a pretty on the nose, but then you have a level where you ride Cortex down a mountain as a snowboard, ramming into stuff, grinding rails on his balls, and at some point even go through a strip club called the Mulong Cortex, which is, it's appropriately cartoony, off the wall, and just overall a blast to play through. I've got no real complaints. I even love the details of Cortex running all these random businesses out in the middle of fucking nowhere. Well, I mean, my one complaint actually would be if you're trying to collect all the gems here, it's kind of a nightmare. I usually like having fun, so I just skip the ones in this section. But, on the few times I have actually gotten them all, I sort of found out that Cortex's snowboarding controls, when you're trying to be precise, are kind of ass. You gotta gain momentum, but not too much momentum to get through little openings. You gotta turn on slopes that will randomly pull you in the wrong direction. And the cherry on top? The only way to go back is by offing yourself. And if you happen to collect all the gems before this point, you only get one chance to collect the gem at the very end of the section, because if you miss it, you won't be able to die before the next section of the game begins. And there's no way to immediately go back to this unless you made a extra save near the beginning of this level and are willing to do it all over again. Truly, nothing in this game can exist without a catch, it would seem. For every fun and new and cool idea Twinsanity brings to the table, there's always gotta be some drawback, some glitch, some fatal flaw that renders it all a bit hollow again. It's annoying because there are parts of this game I really do like, but there is always something holding it back. Unlike Wrath of Cortex, I can see the innovation, the passion, the heart, the soul. I can see a dev team trying to make something good, but ultimately always falling flat on their faces.
I've never been so humiliated. No amount of treasure could ever begin to compensate.
Treasure, eh? Bonza.
Our next destination is Engine's battleship, where Engine goes... And after that, you pretty much progress through the ship full of missiles and torpedoes and kill a bunch of rats. It's not bad. Then we get a boss fight with Engine himself, which is, well, let's just say he kind of peaked in this game already with that mecha bandicoot battle, because this one is just kind of pathetic. You yet again just run around in a circle and then stand near one of the nest's support beams when he throws a TNT. That's really it. It can be beaten by just running around in a circle and then standing still for a second. I do find it really funny though, that when he does throw a TNT at his own crow's nest, he just kinda stands there. You know? Like, he threw it right on top of his nest support. And, it's almost like he knows it. It's waiting to fucking die, I guess. Then you fall inside the ship, and this walrus chef guy wants to chop you up and use you as meat for his pot, so you gotta run away from him in one of the more tricky chase sections. It's a pretty cool moment because it has this crazy intense beat playing in the background. The walrus is right on your ass at all times. He's immune to nitros and fire, and I mean, yeah, clearly this guy's in the wrong line of business being the chef. He should have clearly been a boss battle guy. But this game at this point is going a million miles a second, so then you escape the walrus guy, end up in a field full of TNT where Engine lands on one, blows them all up, launches you over near an ice block, and then fucking Dr. Nitrous Brio and Entropy are just chilling out on this ice block, I guess. And so they heard about the riches that the twins have somehow. I don't know where they learned about that or why the fuck they are on this random block of ice, but they asked Crash to tell them where those riches are. And after literally a fucking second of time, Entropy is like, "Silence, eh?"
The rats are leaving the sinking ship. Tell us where the treasure is, and we'll let you go. Silence! Looks like we'll have to wring it out of him. Embryo, get changed.
So does Brio work for Entropy now? I guess that kind of is an interesting duo, but they don't really do anything with it besides this cutscene. It's also super random, but we are thrust into yet another boss battle where Brio bounces around as a giant frog monster that all you have to do to beat him is walk around in a circle, and then when we get to the other part of the fight where you fight Entropy, who has a shield now, and doesn't shoot any projectiles at you like he did before, and instead just slams his big staff down on the ice around him, which you can completely avoid by jumping around on the circle on the edge of the ice pieces, where he will never be able to reach you, and then when he hits the ice 3 times, he hurts himself somehow, and then you hit him. Man, what the fuck? Fucking Entropy cannot catch a break. His design is so cool in this one, and yet he's reduced to fucking nothing. The only hazard in this boss fight realistically is the fucking water. And hey, it's another boss that you can beat by running around in a circle. Oh wait, right, I almost forgot. This one you jump around in a circle to beat. We're really pushing the new ground here. I mean, don't get me wrong, not every boss in the original trilogy was a banger either, but by this point, there was at least something that you had to jump over, something that required you dodging an attack, something other than running around in a circle. I mean, thus far, we are halfway through this game, and the boss peaked with the first one. That's not a good sign. I mean, well, obviously the first boss was easy, it was also genuinely fun, thematic, and required you actually jumping or dodging stuff, or spinning projectiles back. Well, anyway, after you follow Cortex back to his base after he does this same animation for like the 20th time at this point, with crystals in hand, suddenly Coco appears, and...
You monster! Let my brother go!
My crystals!
Ruined, thanks to Perky here. Must be repaired, and only one person can help. My niece, Nina Cortex. Isn't she delightful? Obviously, I've made a few modifications here and there. Quickly, to my private dirigible. Set a course for Madame Amberley's Academy of Evil.
And so we're off to the Academy of Evil to meet up with a new character for this game, Nina Cortex. But before we get into any of that, I do want to note that for a long time, before I really knew anything about this game's development, I sort of had the feeling that the developers hated Coco, or at least had some inside joke going on to keep her out of the game and the plot, since from the start she gets zapped, and then halfway through the game later she comes back, kicks Cortex in the nuts, and then gets zapped again and is pretty much the last that we ever see of her in this game. Which is weird since she had become a mainstay in the series at this point. I suppose this was done partly to have the focus be more on Crash and Cortex, but there is actually more to this story, and trust me, we're going to get into it. But all the same, Coco got the shaft a bit in this game. Oh, and also if you happen to touch Coco while she's frozen like this, you take damage for some reason. Coco can literally kill you while she's frozen. But anyway, on to the third and most unique hub world in the game, and I suppose the third act, Evil Academy. To start, we have another cutscene where the evil twins taunt Cortex by showing up in his Zeppelin and fast-forwarding his voice when he starts monologuing against them, which leads into the first time where we actually get to play as Dr. Cortex. I'll discuss his gameplay more momentarily, but here is basically a quick shooting section where Cortex easily kills the ant aliens before we then have a hard cut to Crash just standing in the middle of Evil Academy. It happens so fast without any fanfare or even an establishing shot or, well, anything that even Crash seems befuddled how the fuck he got there, not even caring to do an idle animation like he normally does. Well, absolutely atrocious cut aside, this is without a doubt my favorite setting in this game. It's this gothic castle with similar design philosophies to Cortex's castle from the first game. The place is full of universal monster tropes, mad scientists, monsters, robots. It has one of the best songs in the game. Now, does it make much sense for there to be an Academy of Evil where all evil doctors and the such go to learn how to do evil? No, like, not at all. However, working on the silly cartoon logic that this game consistently has had, it makes sense and furthermore is used as a means of expanding upon Cortex's character. This place represents Cortex's youth, a place where his devilish mind was encouraged, berated, grew up as a whole. It's an interesting setting, and it's one of the few times the game does more fully utilize one of its ideas. That being said, before we go through the school proper, we gotta go down into the sewers. They kill a bunch of fucking rats and roaches and other such things. Though the main gimmick in this level is Cortex being trapped inside a pipe, and you using him to progress through areas.
I'm stuck! The greatest evil scientist in the world! Stuck in a pipe. How could things get any worse?
You know, I'm not really one for fart jokes, but I do find this one a little bit funny. Mainly because it's the only one in the game, comes out of nowhere, and just adds to Cortex's general misery and suffering. Gameplay-wise though, it's pretty basic. Just platform through the area and hit all the switches so you can then launch Cortex into a tube, so long as he doesn't die along the way. You'd think at some point there would be some kind of puzzle, or that you'd have to hit stuff in a certain order, or that you could only hit some switches while he was on his way to his destination, but no. Just not bad, but I will say, like all the ball physics-based stuff in this game, controlling and maneuvering Cortex in this pipe is quite awkward. However, past this kind of mid-part is, without a doubt, the best boss fight in the game. Finally, we get another good boss. And of course, it would be Dingodile. He's the only one not fucking around in this game, apparently. For one, this is a boss you can't just mindlessly run around in a circle to defeat. Dingodile has a wide array of attacks, trick attacks, stuff to dodge, slide under, jump over, and run away from, making it a genuine challenge. He also changes up his attacks and patterns with each successful hit, making the boss all the more difficult as it progresses, until you reach the climax, where for once I really felt like I was having a ton of fun platforming in this game. It's an astounding wake-up call and genuine piece of greatness, and is, sadly, the peak as far as bosses go in the game. It only really goes down from here. But still, after that awesome boss fight, we are then taken out of the sewers and back where we started before. And it's now time, while we're standing here, that I finally get to bring up one of the most egregious glitches in this game. Okay, see this door here? Well, that door takes you to the next section of linear levels in this hub area. The camera is pointing at it and it's clearly telling you that that's where you need to go next. However, if you decided you were going to explore this area that you've been to before and maybe collect some gems you missed last time, something truly terrible can happen. If you go through this door, you'll notice something rather peculiar. That Dr. Neo Cortex is here in the same spot that he was before. And if you happen to talk to him, like I did back whenever I was a kid, assuming that he had something new to say, the same cutscene from before plays out, and the secret entrance to the sewers opens up again. That's pretty weird. Yep, they were so crunched for time that they literally didn't even set it up so that you can't accidentally repeat sections of this game. This can happen at multiple areas in the game, mind you, and if you happen to accidentally walk into one of them, you are now locked into repeating this section again. What's more is you can actually go through this entire level, like beat the whole fucking thing, getting ready to move on to the fourth and final section of this game, and the game will still have Cortex down there and will let you trigger this cutscene that could potentially lock you into redoing at least an hour or so of levels. Now, luckily, you can manage to escape this lock in the latter case, but the fact that this is a thing at all is quite something, because even if it doesn't lock you out, it's just weird that it's so easy to have the cutscene play back, and again, it showcases why this game is objectively broken. Anyway, on to the next section of this villain school. To start, I will say that aesthetically, I absolutely love this place. The shiny checkered floors, green acid baths, paintings of various gothic places and people. I love it. Gameplay-wise though, it's mostly a bunch of platforming through halls, and weirdly enough, these stealth sections where you gotta hide from this guy with a flashlight, despite the fact that you can stand right in front of him and blow him up, I guess. It's kind of brain dead, but whatever. Then we have this platforming section where you need to run through this library with acid rising up. That can be a bit tricky, if you don't know that you could skip a whole section of it, like this, and comfortably make it through, no problem. But still, not a bad section. And then, after all that, we finally get to do the thing that on the back of the box and a ton of marketing around this game advertised. We get to play as Dr. Neo Cortex. So, how does he play? He's alright, nothing to write home about. Don't get me wrong, his gameplay certainly isn't bad. I just love the idea of being able to actually play as one of my favorite video game villains. And also, I really like the fact that Uka Uka is at his side instead of Aku Aku when you collect masks. It's a very cool detail. But gameplay-wise, he has a ray gun with limited ammo that you can use to body most enemies with one hit, and that you can get more ammo from boxes. The problem is that most of his gameplay sections here are just shooting things, and using switches because unlike Crash, he can't really platform. He just has a really pathetic small jump, which again is fine, and there are even some really cool details, like the fact that if you run out of ammo, Cortex now has a new walking and idle animation where he runs away from enemies like a coward, and like looks super scared because he has no ammunition to speak of. It's a very nice touch. I also like the sly smile he gets when he shoots things. So aesthetically, very nice. But gameplay-wise, Ratchet & Clank this is not. I suppose this is one of the only sections of the game where you actually do get to play as them though, and you can kind of tell by how little things like the ammo crate not making a noise when you pick up ammo from it is a clear glitch, or the frog enemies that just kind of spawn in these random rooms just randomly despawning after a bit after you've killed enough of them, I guess. Or this terrible checkpoint where you like spawn in with two robots literally about to kill you. Or again, the fact that this is the only section of the game besides a boss battle section later on in the game where you actually get to do the thing that was advertised all over the place and play as Cortex. Still, for what it is, it's fun enough. It's a nice break from the normality of the game up till this point, I suppose. And so I enjoy it for what it is, despite the fact it's very undercooked and could have been so much more. After this, we are then introduced to a brand new character for this game and series, Nina Cortex. Cortex's nephew that is sometimes, as a passing joke, referred to as his daughter.
Scratch and its sharp teeth that bite. Under the covers, there's no need to hide, for your uncle's the monster, and he's on your side! Nina, my adorable young niece. My, you're getting big and sneaky. Put her there, little lady. I see they need some adjustment. Let me take a look. Okay, young lady, let's see what you've learned.
And from here, right after we just got to play as Cortex, we are now playing as Nina, the third and final playable character. Nina conceptually is pretty funny since it alludes to strange family connections with Cortex that seem to be made confusing on purpose. And gameplay-wise, she's actually really fun. We get this unironically banger track, while this goth girl with buck teeth frolics through the school, spin attacking enemies, platforming across rooftop, and utilizing her signature move. These long, stretchy mechanical arms to attack from afar, blow up nitro crates safely, and grapple hook up on buildings. Is yet another great change of pace, and genuinely one of my favorite moments in the game, even though Nina doesn't really say anything, and seems to be mute in this game, which I guess was a creative decision and not a budget thing, I'm going to assume. Her personality comes through all the same with her animations and gameplay. And yeah, I just think that she's pretty cool. I didn't think what the Crash series needed was a Frankenstein-inspired bucktooth goth gremlin girl with biomechanical arms, but here we are. Anyway, so eventually we have to do this chase scene where there's a giant bus behind us because Cortex's blimp was tied to it, and I get the most clutch checkpoint ever. Then we transition back into playing as Dr. Cortex to face off against the principal of the school.
You are in detention!
Madam Amberly!
So, crybaby Cortex is all grown up. I see you found employment as a barber.
I'm an evil scientist!
A scientist, are we? To me, you'll always be a little verb.
Now, the actual boss fight is alright. You gotta avoid her attacks, shoot these organ pipes back down when she shoots them up, and so that she doesn't trap you in place, and fire her bells, I guess, back at her. It's not bad. Not the best, but is one of the better bosses of the game all the same. I do wish we knew just a tiny little itsy beatsy bit more about this character before we fight her, since her and Cortex seem to have history. Oh well. We're ramping up towards the finale of the game. We gotta keep moving, folks. We gotta keep going. Also, you randomly have unlimited ammo in this section, this entire boss fight. I guess it would have been too hard if you constantly had to keep picking up boxes and conserving ammo, considering how much you need to use ammo to basically fight the boss and avoid their attacks entirely. But I figured I'd note it all the same because the ammo and the ammo crates never come back after this. Anyway, that's the end of this section of the game, as we now transition into the finale of the game, and get a cutscene showcasing Cortex as a kid and his history with the twins.
Wait, I think I remember now. The way it happened.
Victor, Moritz, back in your cage, you naughty boys.
I was 8 years old and the most popular student in the academy. Ah, yes. How they loved me. It was my first experiment with the Evolvo Ray. Phase 1 in my plan to create an army of super animals. The test subjects, my 2 pet parrots, Victor and Moritz. The only creatures I didn't load or eat. The experiment was proceeding as planned, when suddenly... my parrots were gone. lost amongst the infinite dimensions. I was heartbroken. How I missed those twins, and how I longed to see them again. But be careful what you wish for, young man.
Back off, Grandpa!
For your wish will come true.
Which brings me to the point that I've been alluding to throughout this video. And that is that Crash Twinsanity, story-wise, is much more about Cortex than it actually is about Crash. I mean, this whole game starts because Cortex got out of the Antarctic wastes, plotted revenge on Crash, failed, and then, ironically enough, his first experiments he ever tested the Evolvo Ray on, the twins have come back from their dimension to take revenge on him. And despite the fact their plot keeps changing from cutscene to cutscene, ultimately they have a grudge against Cortex, not Crash. We go through Cortex's lab, Cortex's old evil academy, meet his relatives, and ultimately face off against his enemies. Crash is really more just here to be along for the ride. I mean, obviously stopping the twins is a good priority and in his best interest as well, but the narrative has been solely focused on Cortex and his character development and history, which I think is not only an interesting direction, but one of the reasons that many people love this game despite its flaws. Because Cortex is so lovably wicked, and the game goes out of its way to punish him time and time again. And even though he deserves it pretty much every time, it's hard to not feel some pity for him. And while Cortex always had some semblance of a backstory in the manuals of the Crash games, this is really the first game where he is truly given the main focus, and turns into the lovable asshole that every game after this would continue to use as their de facto version of Cortex, even in Crash 4. For as flawed as this game is, this characterization of Cortex is truly wonderful. Very charming, and I can't help but gush about it. And in fact, this game is so much about Cortex and his story that the evil twins literally never even say anything directly to Crash throughout the entire game. I mean, maybe they're talking at him at points, but they never address him personally, which I do actually think is a bit of a missed opportunity, since in reality, they should be able to relate to Crash way more, since they too, just like him, were experiments gone wrong, out here ready to take revenge on Cortex, just on a more global scale, I suppose. You would think that they would try to relate this idea to Crash at some point, even if he is kind of too dim-witted to really understand what they're saying. Or hell, even the other minions of Cortex who are kind of off doing their own things. It's actually a very strong story idea to have the villains not only hate Cortex, but also have these connections with Crash Bandicoot. But sadly this point is never addressed and is kind of just left as a cool detail that you could notice, but is ultimately unrealized. And on that note, we then get this little cutscene where Cortex says the following.
Come now, as we explore a new dimension! It should have been 2 new dimensions, but we ran out of time.
Which I think is my cue, before we finally wrap this game up, to take a look at the endless amount of cut content this game has, and its characters are often joking about. We know this game wasn't finished, but just how much of it went unfinished? Well... Now, bear in mind that there is no possible way I could cover every single little piece of cut content for this game, mainly because I don't want an additional 30-minute section in this video, but I will cover some of the most interesting stuff, such as the copious amounts of concept art, of levels, enemies, characters, and other such things, made by artist Keith Webb. A lot of this stuff you can actually unlock via the gems in the game, almost as if the game itself is rewarding your efforts by telling you, hey man, look, this game was supposed to be so much more cool. I mean, just look at all this cool shit that never made it into the game. But hey, thank you for completing what we finished anyway. I haven't much to say in regards to these besides so many of them look badass, and that I would have loved to have seen the game where more of these concepts actually made it into the game. There's also a ton of unused enemies and enemy animations that you can find via JMac's YouTube page. Again, showcasing a ton of cool concepts that never made it into the game. There is a ton of alien trooper variants that no doubt would have played a much more important role in the finished Twinsanity project. There's a UFO and just like a bunch of crazy shit related to it. But beyond concept art and, well, concepts generally, we also have a few unused cutscenes that, while not fully animated or anything, were fully voice acted and completely storyboarded out. And YouTuber Beta M actually went through the trouble of sort of reimagining them for us to get the best shot of what they might have looked like in the game. So, bearing that in mind, here are a few of the cutscenes from the game.
How about another cocktail?
I've never been so humiliated. No amount of treasure could ever begin to compensate.
Treasure, eh? Bonza.
Hello. I'm Lex Lang. I play the evil genius Dr. Cortex in the Crash Bandicoot video game franchise. Come with me now as we replay levels from the latest thrilling installment, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity. Look out for the hidden gems. They'll earn you exclusive bonus material.
What am I doing? Curse my regimented upbringing. That's it, Cortex. You want to make up for lost time and play with your pets? So be it.
A giant robot? That doesn't even make sense. Very well. Let's get this over with. Nina, you scared me. Come here. Forget it.
Ain't that sweet? It's a real man who ain't afraid to show his feelings, and my mom says real men prefer their cocoa hot and bitter.
I'm not thirsty. Let's go. I thought it best if I came in disguise. We don't want to attract the wrong kind of attention.
Now that's my kind of woman. Ahoy, my golden siren of the deep. I shall shower you with pearls and make you my sea bride. Dr. Cortex? How confusing.
We must be careful. The dimensions coexist in fragile equilibrium. Any contact with our alter egos in this reality could prove disastrous. Welcome to the 10th. Forget I said anything.
Our magic is no match for the twins' power.
What we need is a little brute force. Mecha Bandicoot is equipped with an electronic brain, programmed with Crash's own cerebral patterns.
Are you sure that was wise?
Let's bring him home. Engage autopilot! What's the worst that can happen?
You monster! Let my brother go!
My crystals! Interesting. The malfunction has opened a portal into her brainovial hyperbarium, the well from which her personality springs like sugar water. What pastel-colored horrors await in there? I wonder.
As you can see, there are several parts of the game that would have played out far different had these cutscenes been in the actual story. I really love the engine stuff in particular, as the whole scene is genuinely hilarious. It also would have actually given him some dialogue outside of in that section of the game. Also, the Mecha Bandicoot stuff is pretty damn funny. There are, of course, many more general moments of characterization for Cortex and Crash and pretty much everyone here, which ultimately makes it really sad to see that this stuff never made it into the game. The concept of there being a good version of Cortex to go with the evil Crash and Coco is quite clever, and could have led to some great comedic moments. Now, something you might have caught in that last cutscene there is at one point there was going to be an entire level that takes place inside of Coco's mind, entitled Gone a Bit Coco, with Cortex specifically having gone into it and would have been the main playable character of the level, and would have to fight off these Care Bear's ass goody gumdrop type enemies in this super colorful and girly landscape. Apparently the story reason for Cortex going in there was that he was trying to get some information that only she knew about. What that information is, I don't really know. However, in the process of entering her mind, he would end up accidentally messing up her brain and would require the assistance of Nina Cortex to fix it for him, thus being the original reason why they go to the Evil Academy to get Nina Cortex. This level apparently came very close to being finished, and footage of it existing can be seen here, with Cortex shooting his gun in this place. Sadly though, the level was just not in a finished enough state by the time the game was close to release, so the whole thing would end up having to be scrapped, which is a shame since it would have been fun to see a bit more of Coco in this game, and it sounds like quite the cool level concept. Like I said before, Coco really got the shaft in this game, but what if I told you that she got an even bigger shaft than you might have ever even realized? Because you see, at one point during the development, Coco was also meant to be a playable character, but this was ultimately also scrapped. However, evidence of this literally exists on the back of the Twinsanity box, which says right there very clearly that it has 4 playable characters, when it in fact only has 3. And there are tons of other level concepts that we only see some concept art and some interview information about, but nothing too concrete, such as one that would have had you playing as Nina racing the Komodo Bros for a power crystal, or a level where you ride on a train operated by Koala Kong, which I absolutely love conceptually. There is an enormous chunk of content missing from the game, and it's terribly tragic to see what could have been. If only they had been given more time, and, well, worked together better as a cohesive team. But we'll get to that latter point in a minute. But in general, I think you get the point. You've gotten a good taste of the stuff that was completely cut out of the game. So, why don't we go ahead and talk about how this game ends.
Your fur is so soft and warm. Evil Crash! No! This way!
To start, the atmosphere and general design of this place is stunning and is without a doubt one of the best areas in the game design-wise. The red, purplish ground, the demonic-looking architecture, and just look at that skybox. That really is something to marvel at. Now, gameplay-wise, this first section brings back the mountain slide section where you're chasing evil Crash who has just kidnapped Nina, and another section where you need to save Cortex as he gets chased by evil Crash. They're just basically a rinse and repeat of sections that happened earlier in the game. Maybe slightly more difficult, but not even that really. There's also like a play-by-play exact replay of what happened before with the initial cutscene of Crash jumping onto Cortex, and nothing new really happens with it, so it's kind of weird. It's almost like they copied and pasted the cutscene, which is a bit of a shame. After those sections, we have the hardest gems to collect in the game, with some ball puzzles and the only other places in the game where that whole kick a ball or kick an object and it will go over something mechanic is used ever again. However, once you're done with all those, or just simply skip them, which is probably what most people did, the final level of the game is actually, without a doubt, the best part of the game gameplay-wise. You have all these colored platforms and quickly moving platforms, lasers and what have you. It all genuinely provides a decent challenge. The colored platforms in particular that have a set pattern that you have to memorize in order to get over these great chasms is a wonderful section that felt amazing to get through. It made me wish that there was more like it in the game. But hey, if it's gonna show up anywhere, it might as well be the finale, right? This place can be genuinely challenging if you're not quite up to the task, or just weren't expecting the game to actually start putting forth some challenge, since up to this point, in my opinion, outside of the Dingodile boss and a few select sections of the game, this Crash game has been pretty easy overall, with the most difficult aspects of it being the glitches or the occasional bug here or there, or I guess if you're going after all the gems. After this relative high note, we then move on to the big ol' final boss. Well, after we get this cutscene where Entropy and his lot manage to get into this dimension, somehow, and we get a little cameo from a special someone.
Oh my, I almost forgot. The treasure!
Our treasure.
Yes, we are rich!
That treasure is stolen property.
It's a little late to develop a conscience, Doctor.
Personally, I don't care, but I think he might want his gems back.
Delightful. Then we get this cutscene before the confrontation with the twins, Mech.
Well, well, well. Apparently, you two little rascals have been very busy since the last we saw each other.
Busy finding a way to meet you again. Your failed experiment sent 2 innocent parrots to the 10th dimension. The severe reversal radioactive conditions here sharpened our skills and warped our fragile eggshell minds. Ingredients are a classic recipe in the Evil Villain cookbook. You see, Pops, when it comes to evil scientific prowess, we learned from the best.
True. Now,
Playtime is over! Victor, Moritz, back in your cage, you naughty boys!
What am I doing? Curse my regimented upbringing. That's it, Cortex. You want to make up for lost time and play with your pets? So be it.
Well, here we are at the big final boss of the game. So, how is it? Is it one of the highlights? Is it good? Bad? It's okay. Not bad, but also where I realized something extremely strange about the controls on Nina Cortex. See, you have to play as her first through the first round of the final boss, and you tank health points off the boss by grapple hooking up these towers while avoiding the mech's attacks and these little alien guys that it spawns out of itself to attack you. However, something really strange started to happen. You can see through my gameplay footage here, but no matter how many times I tried pressing the proper button to grapple hook up to this last grappling hook where the things where you have to break are, I just kept missing the last hook just before you get to them, and I had no idea why this was happening. As you can see through the footage here, you can see that the hook is being highlighted, and while you can't see my hands pressing the button here, I was pressing the button as many times as I possibly could, and then I tried pressing it once, or pressing it at different portions of the time whenever I was up there, or holding the button down, and every possible variation you could think of. But no matter what I tried, no matter how many times I pressed it, how few times I pressed it, how long I held it down, it seemed like it only would work half of the time on the last hook. And if you fall from that height, you are of course going to have that terrible fucking fall on your ass, slowly get back up animation, which takes so much fucking time that the enemies are definitely going to get a hit on you, if not outright kill you, because the mech will also be there to finish you off. This essentially made this last grappling hook on all 3 of these towers completely RNG to me for a little bit, and as you might imagine, made it quite annoying to get through, and caused me quite a few deaths. Like, a lot of deaths, actually. It was getting so ridiculous, and after I experimented with all these different button combinations and pressing faster and slower and what have you, I finally just decided to look up online if anyone else was having this issue, as I really don't remember running into this in the past when I was playing this game. That's when I read from someone on GameFAQs that you cannot move the analog stick at all while grapple hooking in this particular section, which when I then tried doing just that, just pressing the button without moving the analog stick at all, lo and behold, this fixed the issue. I was able to beat this section first try after that. Now, I really have no idea why this is the case, since I hadn't run into this issue with any other section of the game that you play as Nina Cortex. Being fair, there's only one other section you play as Nina Cortex, but the grapple hooks in that other section worked perfectly fine. And again, grapple hooking on every one of these other hooks is also just fine. It's just the very top ones of these towers, which they probably just copied and pasted, making it a issue across all 3 of them. It's just the tops of these towers that have this extremely strange and specific stipulation of not moving the analog stick. And due to these being the only grapple hooks in the game, to my knowledge, that work this way, I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say that this is yet another glitch. Again, it would be one thing if this was how it worked through the whole game, but it just isn't. So I think it's fair enough to say that this strange glitch, where you touching the analog stick while grapple hooking on these towers will somehow suddenly not allow you to grapple hook at all, is a serious oversight in the finale of the game. I mean, that's some Sonic 06 levels of jank, not being able to touch the analog stick lest you mess up the section. Again, once you understand not moving analog stick is to play, this section is then actually very easy and not a problem at all. But it's still an objective flaw all the same. That complaint aside, the music here in this final boss is actually pretty decent, and after we get through that glitchy mess of a section, we then play as Cortex. His section, you just run around in a circle and shoot his gun. It's pretty easy. Though the one gun attack that the mech has may trip you up at first, since you can't really dodge it unless you're already moving away from it by the time it fires. A little bit tricky, but not too bad. But also kind of amounts to run around in a circle and press the fire button over and over and over again, much like the other bosses in the game. And then we move on to the final round of the boss, where Crash takes control of the Mecha Bandicoot, which we know from the cut content was supposed to actually have a cutscene explaining why and how it got here. But in the actual game, it's just kind of here out of nowhere for no reason. Now, as cool as a mech fight in a Crash Bandicoot game sounds, and as much as I would love this to be cool, this part is sadly the easiest and most pathetic of all. Again, much like almost every other boss in the game, you just run around in a circle, and that's how you dodge every attack it has. And instead of like waiting for an opening or something, you just shoot in between the shields when you have a chance. It's laughably easy. And it's gotta be the lamest mech battle ever put into a video game. Very, very anticlimactic. Well, after that, the twins run out of their base, despite the fact that they have powers over reality itself, and this all should have been the beginning of the fight, since they have telekinesis and can pull people's brains out of their heads and shit. I mean, surely they could do something else here, but whatever. I guess they forgot about all those reality-bending powers they have, and just kind of make their escape. And in their escape, they happen to sneak into the evil Crash's house, and then, rather humorously and unceremoniously, get eaten alive by evil Crash. Then we get this final cutscene to end this grand epic off.
You know, Crash, for all these years I've been wrong about you. Your creation was a mistake, and your existence has been a constant reminder of that mistake. But I've learned something from all of this. I've learned that you can't run away from your mistakes, but you can bury them! I never want to see your ridiculous face again! Where am I? What is this?
I do love that Cortex tried to backstab Crash right at the end here. Though it does kind of feel like we should have had at least one more cutscene before this one, and maybe even after. Like, what do Aku Aku and Uka Uka think about all this? Are they back to being enemies now? Is Coco unfrozen? What does Nina think of, like, any of this whatsoever? I guess she's mute, but her saying something at the end might have been a decent gag too. But, oh well, that's how this game ends, and, well, it was, certainly something. Once again, this game does an excellent job of being a microcosm of itself, with the final boss being this really cool-looking mech, a 3-round finale where all the characters get a chance to shine. Very cool conceptually, and yet completely broken and brain-dead in its execution. In one of the interview questions addressed to Dan Tonkin, the lead artist/art director of Crash Twinsanity, the following was said, quote, "If you had more time with the game, with the experience you have now, what would you have changed within the game?" Ha! Wrong person to ask. I would have taken an entirely different approach to the game in terms of structure, tone, and gameplay style. Even at the time, I was arguing for a different paradigm, particularly for loading level assets. Everyone was obsessed with seamless loading in those days thanks to Jak and Daxter, which was indeed brilliant, but it wasn't necessary to make a good game, and we didn't have working technology to achieve it. So, we had to create a loading system that requires a lot of padding of areas to allow time for memory to be cleared. I also would have liked the vision for the game to have been clearer from the start, based on solid technical know-how, and for it to have been less ad hoc, such as it was. In addition, I would have liked more focus to have been on the moment-to-moment gameplay, and to have made that razor sharp and really engaging, and to have given Crash himself some more interesting abilities that worked in harmony with the classic set of moves. There were some great ideas that were workshopped and made functional that never made it into the final game, for reasons I never understood. On the whole, I think we spent too much time trying to engineer these kind of spurious elements of the game, and not enough on the fundamental mechanics." Unquote. As an outside observer, and simply one who has played this game many times, I cannot help but to fully agree with Dan here. Crash Twinsanity is one of the more difficult games to talk about in this series. Hell, maybe it's the hardest. I say this because, on one hand, this game has so many good ideas and concepts, story-wise. It was instrumental in the direction for these characters moving forward, even on into today, and it's a game that came so close to greatness, and yet so far. The game is also a glitch-ridden, unfinished, poorly designed mess that is objectively broken. Crash Twinsanity is a novel with half its pages torn out, a song that cuts to white noise or skips around as often as it plays its interesting tune. And that is terribly tragic. It's terribly tragic not just because it's unfinished, but because this is also one of the most beloved entries in this franchise. Hell, this game is so beloved that for many it is their favorite entry in the entire series, period. Warts and all, or in spite of them, people love this game for many reasons that I've noted throughout this video, and so much more. Even I cannot help but be swept up in the idea of Crash Twinsanity, despite the reality of Twinsanity being such a blatant disaster. It's why so many people yearn for a remake of this game, not simply because they want this game remade. No, that's not really accurate at all. What people want is for this game to be finished, for this vision of Crash to have fully seen its day in the sun. Many are quick to say that this game, had it been given more time to cook, it would have been the greatest Crash game ever made. And while that may be partly true, it's not the entire truth. As noted again in that same interview from before, quote, "Did the Traveler's Tales Oxford team work smoothly together, or was there a lot of conflict/disagreement on the game? From my point of view, there was a lot of conflict throughout development. I was personally in many meetings where frustration, frayed tempers, and even outright anger was displayed over the way the game was being managed, and the decisions that were being made. There was a pretty palpable tension between many members of the studio. Roles were often poorly defined, and the structure of the studio shifted and changed a fair bit over time. Different people moved into different positions throughout, and often these changes were not clearly communicated to the staff. A particular issue for me was the unclear delineation of responsibilities. Who precisely was responsible, and therefore accountable, for what? I will admit that I was incredibly frustrated at times with the way the development process was ran. And as someone who had already shipped about 8 games in my career at that point, I was often amazed at how little discipline and how much capriciousness was on display. Given the profile of the IP and the importance of its success, there were many aspects of the development process and the studio culture that I found very troubling. To be completely honest, I'm still amazed we actually managed to get a complete game done in the end. Contrary to what a lot of people seem to believe about Twinsanity, the publisher, Vivendi Universal, were amazingly patient and supportive, I think above and beyond their obligations. The problem that faced the development of Crash Twinsanity were entirely the result of how Traveler's Tales operated internally." Unquote. The truth, the cold hard truth, is that this game was being developed by passionate people who had all these ideas, but none of them truly knew how to bring any of it together. At least not in the time allotted to them. It's why there are so many interesting ideas that feel half-baked. So many great concepts left entirely on the cutting room floor. Design choices that conflict with one another. Glitches that go beyond your typical affair. And while I would love to believe and love to have seen what this game would have been like if they were given another year or even a half a year development to put more of these things into it, I feel like the reality of everything that I've seen in this game and the knowledge we have of the development process showcases that maybe this game was never, ever going to be complete in the way that we want it to be. Even more of an issue is that this ambitious project was also, as noted far back into this video, many of the members of the team's first game they ever designed. Something that is further noted in this final interview answer from Fake Nina, the main scriptwriter for Crash Twinsanity. Quote, "To finalize, was Traveler's Tales Oxford happy with Twinsanity? Are there any plans on ever working on this series again?" I think it was very challenging for us to make Twinsanity. It was our first game as a team, and for a lot of us it was our first game period. Looking back now, I think that most of us feel it was a great experience and have a lot of affection for the game. I wouldn't say that we were happy with it. There's so many things we wanted to do, and so many glitches. But I think we would all agree that it has a really great spirit to it, which I think was the result of the passion and energy the whole team put into Twinsanity. It feels like a handmade Crash Bandicoot game. Even when we were arguing with each other, it was always about how we could make the game better. It feels like it was made with love. I don't know if Traveler's Tales will make another Crash game. It's in Radical's capable hands now, but who knows what will happen in the future, apart from Entropy. I want to say that we're all very grateful that Crash fans mostly seem to take Twinsanity as a continuation of Naughty Dog's Crash Bandicoot series. Naughty Dog and the fans are the two biggest things that inspired us in making Twinsanity, so I'd like to thank you all." Unquote. Some of you might say, after hearing all that perhaps this game was destined for failure. Others might say, if it was only given enough time, maybe it all could have come together in the end. But the truth is, we will never know. And I do mean never. I really do not foresee any dev team worth their salt remaking this game, or rather, finishing it more accurately. Because this game you're all yearning for, doesn't exist. It's only the ideas and concepts of a team long overgone. You might as well call it the dreams of the dead. In that way, Crash Twinsanity, the one so many dream of, fully completed and glitch-free, shares the same fate as Crash Evolution before it. Something that simply never was, is, or shall be. Still, it cannot be stated enough, despite everything, this game is loved and admired. And many people still love it for what it is, and what was completed. Yet, the truth is, Crash Twinsanity, objectively, is a very flawed game. An objectively broken game. A half-finished mess that even in its best moments, I cannot help but feel is haunted by what could have been. Crash Twinsanity is a bad game, but it is also a very inspired bad game. I suppose in that sense, Crash Twinsanity will always hold a higher place in my heart than Crash the Wrath of Cortex, despite objectively Crash the Wrath of Cortex being a much more soundly made game, with very few glitches to speak of. I guess I'll always admire passionate ambition over safe mediocrity. I suppose the artist, the writer, the creator in me can't help but be biased in saying that I like Crash Twinsanity a hell of a lot more than I do Crash the Wrath of Cortex, because of the art design, the writing, the concepts, some of the music, and all that the game does deliver in these regards. But as a game, I find it extremely lacking, with even the most fundamental of level design and gameplay choices being questionable at best and outright terrible at worst. And thus I must repeat something that I said before. You cannot judge something by what it could have been, but by what it is. And what Crash Twinsanity is a great set of cutscenes, art design, and general presentation placed squarely in an incompetent, half-finished tragedy of a game. But, sadly, the greatest tragedy of all has yet to come. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you enjoyed this part of the Crash Bandicoot retrospective. Here's hoping the next part doesn't take as long as this one did to make. If you happen to enjoy Crash Twinsanity, or don't enjoy it, or somewhere in between, be sure to share your thoughts down below. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all my loyal patrons and channel members, including all my night eggs and night owlets, as well as a very special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Tyler the Leper, Sharif, Channel 11, Hexmaniac Hannah, Tony Terramaya, Icy Dice, Ho Hot, and Medusa's Hex, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the Fearless Forgotten Ace, the Super Saiyan Sword, the other Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the wise Nicodemus, the very talented Cherry NGT, and the good Chi Vibes Zen Garden Party. A reminder that I happen to have a Discord server which I am very active in, and there's lots of events going on in constantly, so if you wish to be a part of any of that, be sure to join it. And of course, if you want to support this channel, you may become a channel member or patron as well. But until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.